Hi, Justin. How are you doing?
Fine. Nice to see you, Tom.
And you too. Thank you again for taking the time. Appreciate that you're a busy guy at this moment. Would you mind obviously telling sort of the viewers here, who you are, sort of your background, please?
Sure. My name's Justin Biddle. My background, I actually originally trained as a soldier when I first left university, but and came into e-commerce sort of after I left the army. I set up a little .com business, back a few years back, and sold that, and then got into interactive TV. So the first actually websites I ever built were for TVs, which was for IP, video on demand platforms, which was back in sort of the early in the sort of the 2000s. Anyway, I went and did an MBA, and after that, I set up a consulting business, and then sort of morphed into the e-commerce agency because I was doing a big project for a retailer, and they said, help us with vendor selection, looking around for the right platform and the right partners for them. And we came across Magento. I was talking to an old friend of mine who was a Magento developer, and we decided actually, rather than find the right partner because the partners weren't very developed, we thought, well, we'll pitch for it ourselves, and we set up an agency then. Back in 2009, I suppose that would be. And so we had a Magento focused agency, which we then sold in late 2016 to a company called Williams Commerce, and I stayed on with them for a bit. And then after that, I've been involved with a platform called Shopware, which is a German open source e-commerce platform. For the last 3.5 years, and that's just coming to an end now because they're not focusing in the UK specifically, and actually that's what they hired me to do. So so long time in e-commerce now. I mean, you could say it was over 23 years, but probably sort of 14-15 years is more precise.
Amazing. So I suppose with all that experience, you've seen things like trends come and go over the years.
I certainly have. I always think the interesting thing is that in the short term, we always overhype the new technology. We always get overexcited about these things. But in the longer term, we probably underestimate the impact that they actually have long term. I've seen lots of these, these new trends come and go. I mean, I think no one thought back in 2000 when we would, 2001 when we were doing IPTV, that anyone would ever bother be using a laptop, and we certainly didn't think about, we thought phones were rubbish. We thought everything would be on a TV. Obviously we thought might be tablets, but maybe small TV, but we didn't, the hype was different then.
Of course. I think the way the market's gone, I mean, my sister doesn't remember having to use like teletext. Teletext for TVs and things, because everything's just Netflix or Prime or subscriptions, and just
can't say I missed that though.
yeah. I remember booking holidays on teletext with a month. So I noticed, obviously, as you just sort of touched on, you've recently left Shopware. What are your plans for the immediate and I suppose the midterm future?
Well, I mean, it's there are a few plans in the offing. I'm doing quite a bit of work with some old colleagues, both still some projects with Shopware and some projects that we're working on outside Shopware, but around the Shopware ecosystem, if you like. And I've also picked up a couple of old projects with some of my old clients, some of my old merchant clients, which is, they're always asking for help, and it's nice to be in a position to actually be able to help them. And that's normally around what platform should we use? We're having problems here. How do we solve these particular issues? Normally around technology and platforms. So that's quite exciting at the moment. And I'm talking to a few platforms and companies that are entering the UK. One data platform, a couple of e-commerce platforms at the moment, and a PIM platform, in fact, as well, this is a perennial problem, and the problem that we have helped to solve at Shopware is, how do you take a platform or a service that's being pushed out in one particular territory and make it relevant for other territories as well. How do we position it in new territories? How do we come up with a go-to-market strategy that makes sense for these types of platforms? So there's a lot going on. Obviously, I think times are slightly hesitant right now, so no one wants to put, they want to find efficient ways, shall we say, of moving their agenda forward, if you like. But yeah, I think there's plenty out there. It's exciting time. I mean, again, I think we're at a time of massive flux right now. So actually, not such a, it's an exciting time to be thinking, to be refashioning slightly or redirecting slightly.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that I think we haven't really mentioned before, but I think it's, just working from the recruitment side of things on sort of business development. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it's been a really, I think, difficult year for most people, most businesses, layoffs and hiring freezes, and it's just been a pretty bad time. But sort of feels like we're coming to the end of it now. Things are ramping up. There's, people are getting the new budgets, and it's more. I think people are being quite optimistic now about new opportunities, which is quite exciting.
I mean, there's lots going on. I mean, I think the funny thing about e-commerce is that so much has changed, and so we've come so far, and yet in many ways nothing has changed. There's still merchants with rubbish data thinking that they can, that will do. There's still platforms that, don't necessarily haven't thought through how merchants actually use their platform. There's so many things that we don't do that we still don't do, even though the technology is almost unrecognizable from what it was, say, 15 years ago. Still some of the process and the issues with e-commerce still sit there in exactly the same format as they did before.
Of course. Yeah, that's it. No, really good point there, actually. And I think something that we've spoken about before is actually the total cost of ownership, and what this means to, agencies and sort of merchants as well. Do you mind giving me sort of, your insight?
Yeah, sure. I mean, because I mean, I don't know. I've told you this, haven't I? And I'm certainly very keen to tell your audience. I do a sort of total cost of ownership study. And at the moment, it's focused very much on the sort of lower mid market. So on the platforms that service that lower mid market, which for me are Shopware, more obviously on the continent than here in the UK, but Shopware is on that list. Not least because I was working for Shopware at the time. Magento/Adobe are on that list as well, obviously, for those that need the more sort of flexy open source type solution, something they can bend to their will. The two big sort of lower mid-market SaaS platforms are there, BigCommerce and Shopify Plus. And also I put in Salesforce as well. And the idea here is to say, you get headline costs from different platforms and they say, well, it costs this much. But actually that doesn't give you anything close to the full story about how much does this cost for me as a merchant business to use this platform. Because, the initial licensing costs, whatever it might be, or revenue share costs, and the total cost of ownership are very much not the same thing. So I've spent a lot of time trying to putting a model, an Excel model together that says, okay, let's look at these different platforms. Let's make assumptions at different levels. So I don't know, 2 million, 5 million, 20 million turnover. I think there's a 50 million one I'm doing at the moment as well. And make assumptions at those different levels. I.e. what platform, what version of Magento would I be on? Would I be on the Adobe Commerce paid version, or would I be on the Magento open source version? What kind of agency would I require, and therefore how much would they cost? So the idea is that you take in, to make a proper apples for apples comparison between these platforms, is you take in the licensing cost and you take in the costs of supporting that platform by a third-party agency, the costs of evolving that platform, any hosting costs for things that aren't SaaS, or for elements, or even on these modern platforms that aren't SaaS. And you add, so you add all these things together, and you add in any hidden costs of any particular platforms. I mean, the obvious example in Shopify is the cost of using Shopify Pay, which is more expensive than other payment providers. And if you use a third-party payment provider on Shopify, then they charge an uplift for that. So actually modeling all these things together becomes important. And of course, you can go even further. You can say, well, actually, if I'm this kind of business, this is the email marketing platform I should be using, and this is the order management system I should be using. Well, I haven't tried on that far, but what I have done is saying, what is the cost of using that piece of e-commerce software? Make it freely available. If you go to exetail.com, which is sort of my little consulting business, there's a link to it, to the research there. You can freely download it. I hope people will use it. And what I hope it will do is allow merchants and consultants and agencies to say, okay, Mr. Merchant, here's your situation. We can change these things in these particular ways for these particular reasons, but let's make a reasoned decision or reasoned understanding of actually, how much these things cost. Only one part of the decision making when you do a vendor selection, but I think the finance director would say that's a pretty important one.
Definitely.
And it's certainly an important thing to know. Even if you don't make a decision based on it, you should know this is how much it's going to cost.
Yeah, and I think that's such a valid point, because I think the other thing is just looking at cost as what, like say, one part of it, when it's actually the total cost, because
over the lifetime of the platform. There's the important thing as well. So I haven't actually mentioned that bit. Over the lifetime of the platform is very important. So over 4 or 5 or 6 years.
Of course. And I suppose then from your background in agency, it's about finding the right agency to support with that as well, and the costs of all of that involved. And
we make those assumptions. So the assumptions are that if you are at a 50 million level, you have a 50 million type of agency. The thing with all development is if basically I can make you an e-commerce website for any cost you like. If you say I've got £100 to spend, I can build you an e-commerce website. If you say I've got 100 million to spend, I can build you an e-commerce website. I might even use the same platform for both, but these things are not equal.
Of course. No, that's such an interesting, and I think relevant point, which brings me on nicely to my next question, really, because I think something I've seen especially is how closely knit now there's such competition in the e-commerce platforms. I think historically there's probably, I'd say, maybe 3 that dominated the market, with one sort of miles ahead. Mm-hmm. Now it seems like there's an array of options for clients to choose from. And so very tough question to ask you from all your years of experience, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If you had to choose 3 ecom platforms today, what would you go with?
I'm not going to give you a particular 100% straight answer, I'm afraid.
I don't think you could do this. Yeah.
The most important thing here is that, no one builds an e-commerce platform, not to serve an audience. Every e-commerce platform has been built to serve somebody, and and they will be the best for somebody. So there is, there is no 100% right answer. So it's very much horses for courses. But in order to give you some kind of answer, I think you obviously you have to look at, well, what kind of platform, what kind of merchant am I? The first thing you might say, well, am I B2B or B2C? And that fashion, makes part of that decision much easier once you've answered that question. Assuming we're B2C, but let's face it, at the moment, a large percentage of the mid-market e-commerce market is B2C, or at least consumer at the end. So a consumer-facing platform is what's required. So then we've got to ask, how big are you? And depending on how big you are, and therefore the sorts of assumptions you will have made, it's a bit like we would, with that total cost of ownership, then a whole bunch of platforms hove into view, because, there are a number, and I do, again, another piece of work I've done, which I'm thinking about releasing as well, is a vendor selection grid, very much to say, okay, what are the criteria we should be thinking about when we're selecting a platform? Total cost of ownership being one of them, but agency ecosystem is important. Third-party tech platform in ecosystem might be important as well. Scalability is quite often an important criteria. So what are these different criteria, and how do we bring them to bear? And then, of course, how important are they to each particular merchant? But okay, and now I've done the guff. Hopefully now I'll try and give you something approaching a straight answer. Never too straight, but we'll get there. So I think at the lower end of the market, you've got to ask yourself, if you're not choosing Shopify, why not? There better be a good reason why not. Because Shopify is, frankly, pretty bloody incredible with what it does. Now, it's not the panacea for all ills by any stretch of the imagination, but if you are doing straight e-commerce with a fairly cookie cutter type product, you've got to ask yourself, if you're especially at the bottom end of the market, lower end and lower mid market, why, you've got to think carefully before you exclude Shopify. Lots of reasons why you might, but they should be almost your default option, in my opinion. Of course, there are lots of others down there that the lower end that are perfectly good. They don't have quite the same ecosystem of app and technology and sort of extension providers. Obviously, WooCommerce is out there. It's pretty strong, and it's huge. In fact, in many ways, it's bigger than Shopify. But I think that it requires a little more expertise, I think, to get it right. And then there's the Wixes, the Squarespaces as well. And then, of course, there's BigCommerce that have been doing pretty well, certainly in the UK, and have again, a very well put together platform. So I think, at the lower end, Shopify, BigCommerce, WooCommerce perhaps, and then the sort of the Wixes and the Squarespaces sort of thing. Those would be the ones, those are the ones I take. So if it had to be, if it had to be three, WooCommerce and BigCommerce.
Okay. And they're at the lower end of
in the mid-market, things change. I think, obviously Magento and potentially Adobe Commerce, especially with Hoover Themes, HYVA, the new sort of reworked front end for Magento. It takes away so many of the performance issues that Magento used to have. Not all of them, but makes it much more performant, and puts them back in the game again. I think makes that platform, good for the mid market. Whether or not the Magento ecosystem is growing or shrinking, it might be shrinking a bit, but I think in time we could potentially see a resurgence. Always a question around what Adobe plan to do with Magento, which is the fly in the ointment to a certain extent. Shopware, I obviously used to work for Shopware. They're pushing quite strongly into the US. They're always been strong in Europe. We're not prioritizing the UK in the short term, but they're still a very interesting platform, and they're doing some really interesting stuff. BigCommerce again have a very strong mid market, especially in the UK, less so on the continent. But BigCommerce have a very strong proposition here in the UK, and of course, funny this Shopify Plus again. You need to. There's lots, and there are many more reasons why you might not take Shopify when you're in the mid-market space. Mainly because actually, I think when you get to be a bigger merchant, you really understand how you need to sell, what information you need to pass to other platforms, how workflows need to work. And as a result, you need more customization. And that's where the downsides of proprietary SaaS platforms come into play. There are also some really interesting new entrants, and one of the ones that I'm really looking at the moment and really excited about is a Scandinavian platform called Centra. which is a headless platform, but with effectively a SaaS backend, but with a headless, effectively headless at the front end. So, and they put together some really interesting sort of solution stacks with Storyblock and Contentful. I think the two that I've seen, and they're really, really interesting. I think that's going to be really interesting going forward. Obviously, there's at the top end, there's a whole bunch of these things. There's the Salesforce, there's commerce tools that are doing really well. There's all the Sprikers, all the European ones. There's the SAPs and all the rest of it. I get to I think at enterprise everything, there's a whole different ball game. And in fact, what I'm trying to do right now is take that total cost of ownership work we were doing earlier and move it into the enterprise space. But I'm finding actually the sorts, trying to nail down an apples to apples sort of setup for each platform is so hard, because obviously everything is less out of the box in the enterprise space.
Of course. No, I really appreciate that.
Other ones coming up, there's some up and coming ones as well, which I think everyone's looking at. SalesLine are making a big entry into the UK at the moment, which has been really interesting. And an Italian platform called Commerce Layer is been pushing into the UK a bit as well as these guys, Centra as well. So lots going on. So, I mean, Shopify's got if you're going to take just 3 across all that guff and waffle that I've just thrown out at you, Shopify has to be on your list. Almost whatever level, certainly at the lower end and the mid-market level, has to be on that list. You'd probably argue that BigCommerce would have to be on that list, certainly in the UK, less so in Europe. And so the reason why this matters is because in Europe they don't have the agency network to support these guys. They don't have all the right technology providers, all the right order management platforms, and all the right search platforms that make sense for those countries. Mm-hmm. So the proposition is less in that country. The same way that Shopware in the UK is stronger now, but when 3 years when I first joined it, it's like, what, why would I take Shopware when I can't have my email marketing provider or marketing automation provider? I can't use the ERPs I'm supposed to be using. Well, I can, but it's a whole lot of extra effort. So it's interesting how these propositions are very different, whichever country you put them into. So I'm taking just 3, right? So because there's always a short answer, although as you can tell, I quite like the long answer.
Exactly.
So Shopify comes on. I probably take BigCommerce as well, and I probably take Magento, the open source version of Magento at the moment. Okay. With Shopify, obviously, as a first runner up, shall we say?
Of course. I mean, no, I think
Shopware is the first one.
Yes, I appreciate that, because I know it's one of the hardest questions I think I ask, because there is no answer. Don't think you can just pick 3. As you've said, it depends on your needs. It depends on your geography to some extent. So yes, it's very hard to limit it. But yeah, I think those 3 certainly at the moment are, but there's so much competition, from the guys that like Commerce Tools, Spryker, Shopware. There's so much other competition as well that it's just a really interesting market at the moment.
Well, I don't think Commerce Tools comes to play for any merchant that's less than 100 million.
Yeah.
Really doesn't. As to any of the enterprise focused platforms, really. And while there will be trying to be agencies trying to offer solutions for people below that amount, it just doesn't make sense. You don't, when you pick these platforms, you've got to be the right size fish in the right size pond. Yes. You do not want to be a tiny fish in a huge pond, because no one knows you exist. And if you're too big in a small pond, then that can be an equally large problem as well. That's it. And I think it's really exciting to see the new ones that are coming to the UK as well. I think, in the very, maybe that are established elsewhere in other markets that are now making their way across the UK and planning to grow. I think there's a few that come to mind that are really, I suppose, making headway. It's going to be interesting to see how those fare in this market. That's it. I did want to ask, because I think it's a question that it does, I suppose, scare me a little bit. What do you think of AI and what it means for e-commerce? Well, I think scary is one of the first word I come up with. It's exciting as well. I mean, I don't think from an e-commerce perspective per se, I don't think it's that scary. From an overall perspective, I think it's terrifying. I think there's a whole something in the news today about how they did some tests on, wasn't there a drone in the military? There was a drone controller that got killed by his AI controlled drone because it decided that the thing that was stopping it maximizing its efficiency was the handler telling it not to attack the enemy targets. I mean, it's just bonkers.
Wow. Hirobe just come to life.
It is. Terminator is here already. I'm not quite that negative about it. I think for e-commerce, I mean, there is potential for massive efficiency gains for those merchants that've got their data in order. And here, I think, is the key thing here. And that's always about our data. I mean, in order to use AI, and there's always in any kind of data project, and AI is essentially a data project, the old adage goes, garbage in, garbage out. Yes. So for those that get their data in order, AI becomes something that can really supercharge their business. But I think AI itself can only be used in a limited format to help improve data, because the key thing about data, about any kind of data that you may have in your merchant business or agency business, whatever, so they say customer or order or product data, is, do we trust it? So because a part of the problem you have with data is that if there's no data there, you can trust it because you don't have anything there. But if there is data there, now you have a question as to whether that data is true or trustworthy or not. And obviously that's not so easy to tell. It's very easy to tell if you have data or not so easy to tell if that data is trustworthy, except, through sort of subjective analysis. So the key thing with data is, do we trust it? And the key problem with AI is we're not sure. We can't be sure that we trust it. Yes. So for me, you have that cleaning up the data side still resides primarily, or there's still a massive role for us humans, thank goodness, in this process, because all kinds of things that machine learning, ML, machine learning, which I think we should be calling it. We don't want to call it AI. That can do for us. I mean, in the content side, in the customer experience side, we've already seen what ChatGPT can do for us in terms of optimizing our product descriptions, for instance. But we could also do automatic product faceting or merchandising. Which again, there are some already products out there. The idea of this one's out of stock, here's the right replacement items, fit predictors, that kind of thing, with biggest problem in e-commerce, certainly in fashion e-commerce. Demand forecasting for inventory, that kind of stuff. That's all something AI can get its teeth into right now. We've already seen customer services type thing. We can set up automated bots, and they can actually be almost indistinguishable. Fantastic. Once we got the data right, segmentation and propensity to buy models are a piece of cake with AI. The kind of real-time offers, we always, as a merchant, you're always trying to find the profitable price that that merchant will pay for any particular item. And AI gives us the opportunity to effectively open a negotiation on every single transaction we do at no impact to us. I mean, awesome. But all this requires us to get our data in order. And I'm not sure that AI is the thing to do that, because, as I say, the problem with AI right now is that we cannot 100% trust the output, because there are so many variables that have got into it, and it may not have made the right assumptions that we want it to do within those variables. Now, obviously, we can put AI through process to help us do that, which, of course, is what we'll be doing next. But as I say, if the issue with data is that we have to trust it, and the issue with AI right now is that we can't necessarily 100% trust its output.
Yeah,
that's the long answer.
Yes, I think that's that is, I think, a small answer for such a broad question, because I think AI is at this moment, for me personally, a little bit terrifying, especially if we don't use it right. As you say, I think it's all about data management and the input that we can put in. I mean, from a recruitment perspective, it's one of the things I love is finding exactly the right person for the right role based on I suppose their personality and different things. And if AI is able to just scan LinkedIn for keywords and can just say, oh, you're good for this job, I don't think that's quite, and that's just one of the things. I mean, that's from obviously my industry. I think but even like going to Tesco, I know it sounds silly, but the fact that I'll always get just self-checkout because it's so much quicker and easier, but are we losing human interaction? That for me is one of the big concerns as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's essentially a black box technology, which is part of the problem. I mean, again, for merchants, they've got to think carefully, because actually the reason why we do all this, we go through all the pain that you do as a merchant, is so that we understand more about how our customer buys, and the essence is so therefore we can make decisions based on that experience. And by handing all this over to AI, we lose that experience within our business. Effectively, we outsource our core business, which is how we understand the customer. So, yeah. One of the things I am doing is I've just, in the last few days, enrolled for Oxford University runs an AI program at the moment. So I'm enrolled for that, because I think going forward, the most important thing is to understand technology itself, how it can be applied, and it's a re-education moment, I think.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a big demand for, like you say, people with skills in that area as well. So certainly, worth your time doing.
Yeah.
I suppose now we've put the world to rights in terms of AI and sort of what that means. What are you attending any sort of conferences this year, any e-commerce events, or are you going to be sending like an AI drone to go in your place?
Oh, yeah, my avatar. My holographic avatar. No. The next one I'm going to, and I don't know when this is going out, but so it may be in the past, but it's certainly worth one looking at, is a one called Vivant Pulse, which is an agency organized sort of conference. Last year it was absolutely epic. I'm actually pretty sure it'll be good again. I think it's about exactly the same time as the Adobe Summit, which is always an interesting one. And I know you're going along to that, are you not?
I am.
So we shall be at different parts of London. I always love Meet Magento. That's because I've come from the Magento, ecosystem way back, and there's a lot of old friends in that area. And the one thing I would recommend for anyone, especially in agency or in technology, and even some recruitment people as well, is a thing called the Ecom Collab Club, which runs once a month on a Wednesday morning, breakfast time, in London, I think, and sometimes in Bristol as well. And they are a really smart bunch of guys who've put together basically a networking event for agencies and technology partners, which is brilliant. Always worth going to, I think. I think the traditional sort of trade shows are kind of dying a bit of a death. I went to IRX this year and it was quite quiet. I think Shop Talk is the new one in town, and even that was apparently okay at best. But I don't think those. I think the technology platforms are running better events themselves for their own ecosystems. So the ones I tend to look at, especially the marketing automation platforms, do really good ones. The Klaviyo's and the Dr. Digital both run two great conferences, because I think the traditional trade show basically either has sort of rabid sales guys standing waiting to sink their teeth into you as a merchant, or they're overly sales focused because they're sponsored talks to go along to, none of which are particularly appealing for a merchant or useful, so they're not turning up. So in order for these trade shows to make sense, you've got to have a mixture of merchants who want something, agencies who want to provide that thing, or technology want that, want to provide, and you've got to put something in there for everyone. So I don't think the trade show format works so well anymore, and I think it's down to these platforms with their ecosystems to produce them.
Of course. No, I really appreciate that. So yeah, really useful. I'm going to look into a couple of those events. Yeah, going to a few myself, but there's definitely a couple that I'd love to attend anyway. You've just probably cost Hirobe a bit of money in tickets and train fare, but I'll let my bosses.
Well, you recruitment companies should pay.
That's it. Yeah, my bosses can pick that up. I'll just enjoy the train. Listen, Justin, I really appreciate your time. I know you're a busy guy at this moment in time, so thank you so much for having the chat with me.
That's a pleasure.
Again, wish you all the best at the course at Oxford, your new ventures, and obviously with all that you're doing on the side as well.
Thanks, Tom. Nice to see you.
You take care.
Speak soon.
Bye-bye.